you everyone from the organization for having this opportunity. So I will start with, it's very complicated to discuss identity of the country that is a very small one, unknown to many. And that is first of those issues related to its identity. You know, when President Clinton visited Montenegro, he said that it's beautiful to be in Macedonia, for example. So, and as I mentioned in the conversation just before, 2 days ago, USA Today published that Montenegro will be a next NATO member, and there was a map of Bosnia accompanying that text. So the first question is always, where is that? When I say that I'm from Montenegro, people usually are like smiling, like, where is it? Which continent is that? People in the museums, for example, they want to give me audio guide in Spanish because they believe it's in Latin America, which is probably a better thing than if they would knew that it's from the Balkans, they would ask me to leave my Kalashnikov in a cloakroom or something. Because there are prejudices about the Balkans as you know it, particularly from the 1990s. So Montenegro is there. It's a small country, pretty small country of 14,000 square kilometers and 620,000 people, so pretty small. So what are the obstacles? What are the main issues it faced and it's being, it's facing since 1990s? First, there was that issue of being part of the so-called Second World during the Cold War era. Like all of those countries between Baltics and the Black Sea and Caspian Sea and the Adriatic Sea, we started searching for something new that we can add to Western civilization, because all of us wanted to prove that we are not anymore part of some other world, socialist world. Montenegro, of course, was part of Yugoslavia, which wasn't Eastern Bloc, but it was a socialist country. The second issue is the fact that many of those countries, some of them were old nations, like Poland or Hungary. But some of them, many of them, more than 20 of them were new countries, new on the map of Europe or Central Asia. So there was again that question, what is their identity, what they can bring to international scene to make them different and make them interesting to the others. Countries all over from Tajikistan or Turkmenistan to Azerbaijan, Estonia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Macedonia were new to the world. Many of them for the first time, some of them for the first time after many centuries. Third issue about Montenegro is it's being small. And small country always wants to express how different it is from its neighbors that are larger. Because that's the way to prove we should exist independently, because we are different, so sometimes it's exaggerated and overemphasized. And there is a fourth thing, and this has something to do with the structure of Montenegrin population, which is very complex. It's only one of two countries in Europe that doesn't have a majority nation in it. The other one is Bosnia, so it's not a nice thing to be in a club of two. And the other one is Bosnia, a country well known for inter-ethnic conflicts and violent wars and being very dysfunctional even nowadays. But it is very complex structure. You see, there is 45% of Montenegrins, 28.7% of Serbs, around 12% of Bosniaks and Muslims by nationality, to make it more complicated, which is roughly the same. Almost 5% of Albanians. We are the only country where there is not increase of number of Albanians, but decrease, like in Macedonia, Kosovo, Serbia, everywhere number is on the rise. 1% of Croats. Religiously as well, 72% are Orthodox Christians, but there is almost 1/5 of Muslims, and there is significant, although not by numbers, a minority of Catholics. Catholicism was the first religion of Montenegro in the Middle Ages. But later on, since the Serbian invasion and then Turkish invasion, they brought their religions. That's why there is not such a huge number of Catholics today. There are some Jews. Also, their number is increasing. They are building the first synagogue. There are Protestants. Roughly half of population are non-religious, which is remnant of the socialist era. But religion is important in a way because religious tradition is important. So for people, it is important that they are Orthodox, Catholic, or Muslims. No matter they are not going to church or to the mosque, they are not reading the Bible or Quran. You can see here the map, ethnic structure of Montenegro. It's really mixed up. The red one is majority of Montenegrins. All of it on a territory which is the size of Campania or Connecticut or Northern Ireland, half the size of Belgium, so very small one. Here it's big. Red one is Montenegrins, blue one is Croats, A green one, which you can see in the northeast, for example, both light and the darker green are Bosniaks, and here you will find Albanians near the border with Albania, and there are some Croats, the rose, here near Croatia. So it's really a complex. Why it is so? It is a result of very complicated history. Ever since division of Roman Empire in 395, there was a line that went through what is today Montenegro, as you can see. So ever since then, there were different empires, different civilizations then collided and intermingled on the region what is today Montenegro. There is not a country, more or less, there is not a civilization, there does not exist a country, or there wasn't an empire that wasn't present in the region of Montenegro through history. Byzantine Empire, Serbian medieval empire, French Empire, it was part of France proper during Napoleonic era, for example. Habsburg Empire, later Austria-Hungary was there. Venice was there for centuries until Campo Formio. There was even Spanish influence. Spain ruled one town and built a citadel in 1538. For example, there was English naval presence, and of course there is presence of Russia, since Russia was leading Slavic and Orthodox world, and there used to be Slavic brothers to Montenegrins, at least until we were invited to NATO a few days ago. You can see here, for example, Napoleonic era. This is Montenegro of today. This part down there is French Empire in the early 19th century. This, all of it to the north, is Turkish Ottoman Empire. And only this small piece of yellow here was independent Montenegro at the time. Late 19th century, again, Montenegro is much bigger, but still, Austria-Hungary is down there, where France used to be, and before France, Venice. And up there is Turkish Empire. So all of them left something of their civilizations. Of course, through 12th, 20th century, Montenegro was part of Yugoslavia. From 1918 to 1992, it was part of Yugoslavia with other 5 republics. And Yugoslavia was very complex. In Yugoslavia, they used to say the country with 7 borders, 6 republics, 5 nations, 4 languages, 3 faiths, 2 alphabets, and 1 leader, which was Tito. Unfortunately, when Tito died, there was nothing in common for them to keep them together. I mean, there were many things in common, but they thought like that. And they all started rebuilding and reinventing their identities. For Slovenia, it was less problematic because it's the most developed one and the most homogeneous one. Slovenes are a huge majority and they speak different language. In Croatia, it was very complex. They turned to times when they were independent, and it was 11th century for the last time. Actually, 1102 was the year when they lost their sovereignty. So they turned to some medieval kings and queens at the era when there was no nations and states in the modern sense. But it became important for them to emphasize they are different, they have something of their own for centuries. They turned more to Central European identity, although you can see that Croatia has a beautiful coast of the Mediterranean with 70-something islands and 520-something small islands. But for them, Mediterranean was something that represented Mediterranean identity, represented also Balkan identity. Being a Mediterranean country also reminded them of being on Balkan Peninsula of the Mediterranean. So they turned more to their Mittel-European, Central European identity towards Austria and Germany. In Bosnia, there is not a common identity. It's still a country that cannot function on many levels, and about identity, Serbs are looking upon Serbia, Croats to Croatia, Muslims are redefining their Islamic faith, and they are trying to find a new identity attached to that faith. Serbia had a syndrome of a person who lost its arms and its legs, because it was center of a huge country, pretty huge for European standards, and important, you know, Yugoslavia of Tito was a player in international relations. Now they didn't know what to do, so they turned back also to medieval era. They turned to their Serbian Empire of 14th century. There is, for example, so-called a golden fork meat, like on a Serbian court they were using golden knives and golden forks and golden spoons. At the same time, French king or English king ate with their fingers. So they wanted to say that Serbia is like the beginning of the civilization that we know today. Macedonia is even more complicated. There are surroundings with the countries that have disputes with them. Albanians, whose large minorities live in Macedonia. For Croats, that identity, Mediterranean identity, meant part of Balkan identity. For Montenegrins, it was actually escape from the Balkan identity, because in Montenegro, when you say Mediterranean, the first association would be Italy and West. So it started from the 1990s. And you can see now some aspects of Montenegrin culture. We mentioned cuisine, for example, today. Why it is Mediterranean, why there are good arguments, and Montenegro is Mediterranean country, not only because it has 300 kilometers long coast. You can see here, for example, prosciutto, smoked ham. You can see different types of cheese. You can see olives, which is typical from this part of Europe, this part of the world. You can see wine. It's a wine-drinking country, and it's also a wine-producing country belonging to wine belt of Europe, not to the beer belt or to the vodka belt or whatever you call it, because vodka is not everywhere, but that type of drink. So it's wine-producing. There are vineyards, that are, this one is, for example, in the capital city. They say it is the largest one in Europe in one piece. Of course, small countries tend to exaggerate a lot. So I wouldn't be sure whether it's the truth, but it's the fact that there are really huge vineyards, and it is very happy with its wine. It's also outdoor society. This is a Roman square, Piazza di Roma, in the center of new part of the capital city. It is in late November, and around are ministry offices. But government offices. But people usually like to go out, even when they are at work, and they like to drink coffees outdoors, because the climate is nice, except for some time in December and January, people are mostly outdoors, the cafes are full, and people are drinking coffee, which they do very slowly, because it is a social thing. People are gossiping and discussing politics, which is a national hobby, like in many other countries. And discussing Montenegrin identity and whether Montenegrins are Montenegrins or they are Serbs, etc., which is something unique for us. And also sport, betting, etc., because people hope that they will win something, because they do not have very much money. Then there is another aspect, language. Language in Montenegro is Slavic language. It is Serbo-Croatian language. You know, people who are not from the region sometimes think that those languages are different. We can understand when someone is speaking that that person is from Bosnia or Serbia or Croatia or Montenegro, but it's the same language, and differences are probably smaller than American and British English. But now we all like to call it in our own way. There are differences in a spoken language in Montenegro, where you can see that there was a strong Italian influence on our language, in our vocabulary. So there are some words that we use that you can find in southern Croatia, but that people in Belgrade, for example, would not understand. Like some of them here. Guardia was the name of one of the first state institutions in Montenegro. It was a police. Guardia is taken from Italian, for example. Many other words like Dacia, Dura, Zera, Camera, etc., that are of Italian origin. For example, oriz is riso, rice. In Serbia, it's pirinac, which is pirinč, Turkish. So Turkish influence in Serbia, Italian in Montenegro, down there on the Mediterranean. Pasada, passata, cutlery. Italian influence in Croatia and in Serbia, eszeig, German influence from Austria. You know. So even, I'm not a linguist, but there are things that you can see in that part as well, where you can see that there are differences, special ones, that came from Italy. Then you can see in the works of our artists also many Mediterranean influences. Olive trees in Milo Milunovic's work, for example, olive trees are quite common in Montenegro. Sea, products of the sea, sailors, fishermen. This is very important painting in history of our art, for example. You can see pomegranates, melagrana, yeah. Melagrana, which is one of the symbols of the Mediterranean as well. you see, which is also present in Montenegro. Vojo Stanic, the most important living painter, Piazza, you see this, the Kirikian work, or how to say. Again, one of his pieces with a lot of blue and a lot of yellow. Mediterranean influences are obvious. House, which is not on the coast itself, but a bit inside, made of stones. Petar Lubarda, the greatest Montenegrin painter. Here is some landscape which you cannot see, but you can see a red color, which again is the a sign of sun and of the warmth, and the black one and the gray one, which symbolize the mountains of Montenegro, black mountains, which is the meaning of Montenegro, Crna Gora in Montenegrin, in Serbo-Croatian, which go from the sea itself. You will see on the... Then you can see in the architecture, Mediterranean architecture. You see palm trees, you see a church. This is classic, something that you would find in the Mediterranean countries in Europe. You see, again, one of the Mediterranean towns, Castel Nuovo, with the castle that is named in Montenegrin Forte Mare, which is obviously taken from Italian. You see Cattaro, Kotor, which is one of the symbols of Montenegro, UNESCO heritage city. Again, a lot of medieval, Renaissance, and Baroque influences that came through Mediterranean there. You see here one of the examples. You see those mountains that are gray during the day, and when the sun goes down, they are black. That's why sailors from Venice called it Black Mountain, going straight from the sea. These landscapes are used for filming films that happen, that take place in Italy or in south of France, because it's cheaper to do it there. I remember filming a movie with Bob Hoskins playing Il Papa Buono, Giovanni XXIII, John the 23rd. John the 23rd never, he maybe heard about Montenegro, but he never set his foot there. No, but it was some like small Italian town, and it was much cheaper to go to Montenegro to film it. And even this actual place, Perast, one movie with Pierce Brosnan, November Man, was filmed there, and it was standing for Lausanne, like Swiss Riviera. When there is also Mediterranean influence in that Romandie, in that part of Switzerland, although it is in the mountains up there. So the funny thing is, the most famous film that takes place in Montenegro, Casino Royale, is not filmed a minute in Montenegro. It was filmed in Czech Republic, so you can see flags of Montenegro on different very nice buildings in Karlovy Vary, in Czech Republic. I don't know why they went there, because of the Baranov studios, etc., because many films are done in Prague, because it's really just the opposite, and those places where you can see Montenegro are not in Montenegro. Again, two islands. Inside of it you can see also Baroque paintings, which is typical for Italy or Spain, for Mediterranean part of the world. In the east, there wasn't as strong Italian influence. There was influence of Turkey and of Greece, but it's again Mediterranean. You see a bit different. There are mosques, etc. It's Ulcinj. This is one of the symbols of the country. Novak Djokovic got married there in 2014. You see the houses made of stone, also typical from some poorer parts of the Mediterranean here. This one is better preserved, for example, or inside of it. This is how the houses in Montenegro look like in 19th century. No fancy rooms just like that. For many people in the 19th century, it was a very poor country. You see the scenes from the film as well. This woman with their head covered, that were typical women in villages in Montenegro until the middle 20th century. Like they're taken from, I don't know, Zorba the Greek, for example, those bad women that attack Irena Papas, for example, or maybe from Sicily or something. You can see here as well some of the scenes from the most famous director from Montenegro, Živko Nikolić. Goats as a typical animals, domestic animals in the Mediterranean as well, that were very much present, not now because people escaped from the villages to the cities like in many countries in transition, but it was the case before. So from the 1990s we reinvented Montenegrin identity as a Mediterranean one. Everything was named Mediterranean. There is university named Mediterranean, one of the 3 universities in the capital city. Mediterranean Center for Environmental Monitoring, Mediterranean Center for Photography in Bar, Festival of Dance, Mediterranean Festival in Bar, Mediterranean Theater Festival in Tivat, many names of the streets, etc., etc. And it became a template in speeches of our politicians, you know, our president or prime. Montenegro as a Mediterranean country, it's something they usually mention. How Mediterranean it is and how important that Mediterranean part is. It's hard to measure. As Brodel said, it's easy to understand the Mediterranean of oceanographers, geologists, geographers, because they can measure things. But for history, for culture, it is much more difficult. What we think is Mediterranean may be something else for someone else from some other nation. For example, is Balkan identity part of the Mediterranean identity? Or is it something the opposite of it? Is Turkish influence in Montenegro, because of their very long presence, stronger than maybe Italian? Because we would like to be perceived like Italians to the West, and we are more like Turks, maybe, but we do not want to say that, because Turks are less popular than Italians, loved by most of the world, as you know. So there are many questions, but the fact that it is a country of diversity is something that makes it more Mediterranean, because there are many small countries, and not many, but there are some small countries that are also countries of diversity. Like, look at Lebanon, whose territory is smaller than Montenegro, and which has a much more complex population. So that diversity and that eternal, seemingly, reinvention and re-emerging of different ideas and perceptions of identity is something that is related to many Mediterranean nations. So it is related to Montenegro as well. As I said, many things cannot be measured, but it's obvious, and you could see probably on some of these photos, that Mediterranean identity is maybe fundamental, but strong, really strong part of Montenegrin identity and of its heritage. That would be it, I think, more or less. Thank you.
We said that these countries share a lot of visits from other countries. It's also a matter of companies and of meeting of businesses, governments, different nations, a process that is helped and aided by information technology. Now, the whole process has effects on the environment, on the culture, the political system, the economic development, and the prosperity, and on human physical well-being in societies around the world. Now, there's no doubt that today the countries of Mediterranean have faced a number of facts that have brought global interaction. Our question today is, are these countries able to preserve their own characteristics, or are we going towards a globalization that is killing these? Increasing people mobility plus mass communication bring to globalization, to mass consumption, and, in a word, to homogenization of habits, okay? Is this true, and when? Let's think about fashion, okay? Your kids go out to buy a pair of sports shoes. What do they buy? 9 out of 10, it's a brand that you find everywhere else in the world. Let's take an example from Italy. In fast fashion, we had one of the key players until 10, 12, 15 years ago, Benetton. Today, we don't have this player anymore. We have it, but he's changed his business because Zara, main competitor, has come in. Zara is a brand you find everywhere. You find it in Greece, in Spain, of course, they're Spanish. You find it in the US, okay? It's a strong message. And think, we're talking about Italy, one of the leading countries in fashion. What about high technology brands? I would ask each one of you what kind of phone you have in your purse or in your jacket. Okay, I had this question in my class today. 9 out of 10 have an iPhone. It's a community, the Apple community. The Apple store just opened in Florence. The Mediterranean countries are driven by this brand. Food, okay. We just saw a beautiful lecture just now that was pointing out how few but so important elements as olives, olive oil, wine, are shared among all these countries. And still, we have, for example, one brand as McDonald's, okay, leading leading in Italy, Morocco, Turkey, Tunisia. Leading, why? Because 9 out of 10 families have eaten at McDonald's at least once. Half of them eat there on a regular basis in some of the countries. It's not considered an American fast food. It's considered a fast food where normally you would go and spend your time. And these McDonald's, they don't open in countries where the locals don't go. They open only when they're sure that the local population is going to serve them. Okay. Furniture. Who doesn't have something from IKEA in their house? Okay, I'm not really sure over there, huh? It's considered normal to have something from IKEA. This is just an example, but we all sort of grab and like the IKEA environment or lifestyle. Something easy to have in your house that's not expensive, that is driven by design. Okay? It's driven by design, but from a design that's not from your own country. Global teens. Interesting. Young people between the age of 12 and 19. Teenagers randomly chosen from different parts of the world. If you go and look at this, they share many of the same tastes. This is where globalization actually takes more place. It's in this target age. I would say I would go from 12 to 30, mostly, okay? But the question is, are there products, brands that give rise to a common way of living? Globalization of lifestyles. Is this always true?
Especially for some segment of the market, like the teenager we have seen, global brands are really powerful. So we really found some homologation in terms of habits, in terms of attitudes of people. But at the same time, we also found that all the countries that are included within the Mediterranean area, as we have seen now with our colleague from Montenegro, there are many things about local excellence, local product, typical product, something that we can find only within specific countries. But what is very interesting is that all the countries included within the Mediterranean area, they have many similarities. So we decided to do a sort of qualitative study in order to select not all the countries within the Mediterranean area, but we selected few. So we will show you some example, and we started from Tuscany because it's our region, and this is very interesting. This is a project that just started this year, which is called Toscanino, Tasting Tuscany, and basically the idea is to promote all the excellences that you can have in Tuscany. So we are talking about olive oil, we are talking about bread, wine of course, so in general food, but also some ceramics or some fabrics. And what is very interesting, and I will show you, that all the countries we have selected have almost the same features and the same commonalities. For example, I don't know if you know that Turkey is very famous for their ceramics. Actually, the history of ceramics is really, we can go really in the back of time. So over centuries, Turkey has developed this ceramic production, which became most industrialized in the second part of the 50s. And so today Turkey is considered one of the main competitors, for example, of the district, the industrial district of ceramics in Sassuolo, which is in Emilia-Romagna. I just found at the airport in Bologna just a few weeks ago a very big commercial from the Turkish Airlines. They said, come to Turkey to discover the ceramics, and they placed the commercial in the heart of ceramics in Italy. So it is really unbelievable. Another example from Spain, we are again talking about food, the Serrano ham. They have founded this consortium in order to promote and even to protect the quality of the product. But again, if you think about our ham in Tuscany and many other regions, it's basically of the same quality. Morocco. From Morocco, I found this fantastic picture about glasses. These are glasses that usually are used by people to drink in tea. And I don't know if you are, if you know that in the area of Empoli, here close to Florence, there is a fantastic museum about glasses. And if you go to the museum, many of the glasses are very similar to this one. So even in this case, from another Arab country, we found many similarities with Italy and other countries. And we selected other interesting pictures from Lebanese design. This design is very colorful, and actually it reminds me, and even to Sandra a little bit, the style that you can have in the southern part of in Italy, in Puglia, or even in Sicily or Sardinia. There are many similarities. And they are pushing a lot in order to promote the visibility of this kind of design, which is part of the local identity in Lebanon. Many similarity among the Mediterranean countries, and this similarity is not induced by global brands, as we have seen instead at the very beginning. So we can really think that in this case, when you are able to protect your local identity, we are not afraid about any kind of standardization and homogenization. So this similarity comes from the fact that the countries that are within the same area, geographically very close, they share over history their own diet, like Sandra mentioned, the Mediterranean diet, attitudes, history, climate. As Sandra said, we have so many similarities, even in some pictures from Montenegro. Sometimes it reminds to other places in Italy, as Boris said. So, of course, globalization is a process that is still ongoing, and we cannot stop for sure. So, being mindful of the power of globalization, which is a process that we cannot stop in any way, we need to, in some way, redefine or give a reinterpretation of each local identity in each country in a way which should be sustainable. Sustainable means that you have to respect not only the environment, but also you need to have a sustainability in terms of economics, of course, and also in social terms. So our idea was to, maybe it could be even a project, to develop with the school, because it is something that could be very interesting for many small business and even for some local institution. The idea to preserve and even to put in value the Mediterranean culture, the Mediterranean local identity, and when we talk about local identity, we mean the arts, the history, craft work, local heritage, all the typical products. Of course, this is a very hard process because we need to have the collaboration of a network of stakeholders, especially at the local level and especially within the local institution. But the idea could be to create a sort of Made in Mediterraneo. Of course, we know very well the brand Made in Italy, which is very well known. Since we are living in a globalized world and more international, it could be very interesting in our Mediterranean area to work all together in order to create something which can be related, for example, to some local products or just local activities. And this could be very helpful even to help small businesses which are really in trouble today because of globalization. So, of course, as I said, and I want to point it out, globalization is something that is still going on, but we should be able to preserve the local identity of each country. This could be probably one of the main strategies in order to preserve our history and within the Mediterranean area.
I believe we are pretty aware of the fact that without identity, we cannot have dialogue within globalization. We can have monologue maybe, but are we interested in to have monologues? That's my first question. I like making questions more than answering to them, so I will pose at least two main questions. The first question is, why is Venice sinking? Why aren't we able to do something about that? How is it possible? We know that, we talk about that, we even joke on that. Is maybe Venice sinking into the bath tube of her quiet and shallow lagoon? But what's the connection between Venice and Atlantis? We all know that Atlantis sunk because of a sin, the sin of arrogance. So the powerful island ruling a big empire was found to be arrogant, and the gods decided to let her sink into the water. What's the sin of Venice then? Is that an ethical punishment that we are looking at? Do we want to see Venice sinking because of a sin? Well, what I'm trying to squeeze into 15 minutes is my personal idea that, yes, Venice has a sin, the sin of the untamed individuality, of the pure individuality, of the individuality which becomes a sin when it's not able to really dialogue, and which is completely unique. It's personal. Yes, it is. And since nobody cares, I do. As a writer, I always ask myself, and this is my third question, and I hope it's the last one, can writers possibly save Venice from sinking? Writers. I wrote a book in 2004, and the title was, as translated into English, Sinking Venice. The book has been translated into French in 2008, and the reason why I wrote that book is that I narrated in it how Venice saved me from sinking into the stinking waters of my psychic lagoon. So I wrote it as a gift to the city which saved me, and I will be eternally grateful to her because she was able to combine my two main natures, the scholar and the playful child. And thanks to her thaumaturgic touch, she was able to spin everything with a big energy and transform me into a writer with that book. So I'm grateful for that, and I attempted to save her with my book. Of course, I aimed at, I hoped that. But let me tell you all the story from the right beginning. I was 26 years old after I got my PhD, and I didn't know who I was. I didn't feel any calling in my life after all that study, and I had forgotten that as a child I wanted to be a writer. At the same time, I developed a skin disease called eczema. I don't know if you know what it is. It's very, it's horrible to see, it's horrible to have, and it covered first my face, then all the body, and my face starts swelling up. And I immediately got the image of an analogy, one of my weird analogies, the ones that usually I have in my mind, between my skin eczema and the seaweeds that cover Venetian palazzi and the moss that starts coming up from the waters. And I was scared by this analogy, and I just stopped thinking about that. Then I started having nightmares obsessively, night after night, of Venice sinking into the waters and taking me with her. And I started being afraid. I traveled. I started traveling obsessively because obsessively is my way of doing things. So back and forth, back and forth, back and forth to Venice and to Tuscany, to Pisa, where I lived at that time. And I was aware that I had started traveling to Venice exactly the way I used to do with my family as a child, back and forth every weekend there. I grew up in the mountains, in the Dolomites, so can you imagine something more different than the Dolomites and Venice? Well, so I did. I traveled, I took snapshots of Venice, I jotted down plenty of things in my journal, I sketched, I prayed, I sat, I spotted the lagoon, then I went to the churches, to the museums, I lost myself into the mazes of Venice, and I didn't understand why I needed so badly to travel there. But I did perform it. I didn't have any other choice. And then I read. I read as much as possible, also because hiding myself into the libraries was my style of life, and nobody really cares about me having a swelling face or being completely red. So for years, I read and I did research about Venice while not understanding why it was so important for me. Then I started writing, and still I had no idea of what I was doing. At that point, Venice was a part of me, of course, because of all this traveling and thinking and reading and jotting down. And I found myself writing in a very strange, weird way. A few chapters of my would-be book were narration in a childish way, like fairy tales. Some other were philosophical speculation about the destiny of the European city and Mediterranean city. In some other, I was digging big into the big symbol of what Venice had been and could possibly be now and in the future. And all that made a very strange book, which was not a book, actually. And then I thought, well, it is exactly like Venice, which has a lot of everything in it. You can be a child in Venice and lose yourself into the maze. You can be a scholar in Venice and visit all the museums. You can be both. Her symbol is a lion, a winged lion, standing up on a column, pointing the sky, reading a book. Isn't it strange enough? And then I realized, I'm Venice. And I tried to publish that book that created a kind of new literary genre, the fantasy essay. This is the way I put the undertitle of it, a fantasy essay. My eczema went away after that, bit by bit, but it went away, as you can see it today. So again, can writers say Venice? I want it so bad that writers are able to say Venice, but I don't know if they can. What I know is they certainly should. Why? Because writers, when they go to Venice, they go there for discovering themselves usually, at least a part of them, a hidden part of them. One for all of them, von Aschenbach, the musician, by Mann, or in the version the version by Visconti, a writer. No, it's the other way around. Anyway, in a recent ballet by von Neumayer is a choreographer. He goes to Venice for discovering his homosexuality, a part of him which was not allowed at all. But I can name Chateaubriand, Madame de Stael, Proust, Rilke, Hesse, Brodsky, Matveyevich, and Paolo Barbaro. All of them, when they enter the maze of Venice, start having the temptation of doing autobiography. They all do autobiography when entering Venice. And while describing her, they are trying to describe themselves, to provide a description of themselves as a city. Proust, when he went to Venice and tried to find a similarity between Venice and Cambrai, found out that actually there is no similarity between the two, because Cambrai is Venice. The same happened to Chateaubriand, who thought that Venice and Vannes were very similar, and then ended up saying something paradoxical, that Vannes was the mother of Venice and that Venice was the mother of Vannes as well. So something really a paradox. Well, all the writers when enter Venice, they need to find something about themselves. And why? Probably it's because Venice is so unique that it challenged the uniqueness of the individual to come out. That's my idea. And what I like to say the most today is that this is not just of Venice's, because each Mediterranean city has this power. because in the Greek tradition, each Mediterranean city had not a birth certificate, so a bureaucratic piece of paper that said is born, but had a full myth that narrated her birth. So a narration made orally by artists, by poets. And also every single city had family ties around the Mediterranean. They were called syngeneiai. So they were part of a genos, of a family around the Mediterranean. And they also could claim for a genealogy. So they were persons. They were considered as persons with a specific individuality. And Venice is still preserving that uniqueness, which is difficult to be considered into the net of the globalized world. So the city as a person, are we able to not being scared by that? Are we able to understand that each city has her way of being lived? The way each individual has his own way of being, the individual is something you cannot divide even further. It's something that stays there, but it's not something which stays there without effort and pain. The individuality is the possible achievement of a process, of a long process. We need to be able to find out what we are, and the city do the same. And for Venice, the individuality is paradoxical. It's female, it's beautiful, it's falling apart, it's full of color. It has doors that open into the water, and it's learned, it's old, it's fading away, it's both things. We need to accept all that. And writers should be able to accept that the individuality is the core of the communication in the world, because they strive the whole life for finding a voice of them. Oh, I have a voice as a writer. Many of them find out that they have multiple voices in them when writing different books. So the idea is that the city is a person, and the person might be a city as well. So they are connected, deeply connected, also because the challenge of finding your own individuality is as serious as playful. And this is something I believe we have forgotten in our globalized city, to be playful. And if we think deeper, the word person, at least in the Latin persona, is the living creature, but it's also the mosque. So it provides the idea that the city is as well a living creature, an organism. In fact, Venice is dying, so we can call for the metaphor of a living being, and a work of art. A mosque is a work of art. So the city is both, in my opinion. Exactly like a work of art is not just something created, but something generated by the artist. Aristotle in the Poetic says that art, mimesis, is not the imitation of the objects of life, but of the energy of life itself, of bringing to life things. So the city is both things, a living creature and an artwork. And I would say that the city is not just a political fact. It's not at all a natural fact, because it has been created by man. But what is sure is that it is a poetic artifact, whereby poetic, I don't mean made by poets, but done by the poietai, so the artist in Greek, any artist. The Mediterranean city gave birth to philosophy, tragedy, comedy, poetry, art, and the art of speaking as well. So all writers and all artists should be responsible for the cities, because they generated the city of the Mediterranean. Not just the politicians, not just the people who inhabit the city, but the artists should be responsible for all our cities. How? By listening to the city, by writing and talking more and more about the fact that the city is not just a political fact. We cannot leave that to the politicians. We need to be able to create new myths, new narrations of the city, and to put them into the light that best challenge the idea of individuality, especially in the Mediterranean area, where we have those family ties among cities, the way we have family ties among people. So I keep on struggling onto that, and I hope that many writers will help me creating artistic, written, philosophical project about the idea of the Mediterranean city who doesn't have to forget her past. And I'm very happy because Paolo Barbaro, an Italian writer who wrote several books about Venice, and he's Venetian, wrote to me a letter after the book was released where he said, "The ungraspable and necessary city won't sink, I'm sure, if we all friends will talk about that also in the future." Thank you.